It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and there is a series that was put out by, actually it's still on right now. We're kind of in the middle of it right now from the History Channel. It's called Jesus, His Life. So here to talk about it and share a little bit about this series is Dr. Stephen Schneck. Thanks for being here, Dr. Schneck.
It's wonderful to be here this morning, Kyle.
How did you get involved with this miniseries from the History Channel?
It's a funny story. I have some expertise in the governments of ancient Rome and the political impact of early Christianity. And so the producers reached out to me to kind of tap me for that expertise. And then in the process, I got drawn into the whole thing, reviewing rough texts, scripts, and taking a look at rough cuts. And so it was just a wonderful experience for me to be part of the project with so many other great scholars and theologians.
Well, and it's a very diverse group from different Protestant faiths and different historians, and probably what you would expect from the History Channel. It doesn't seem like it's made to be evangelical necessarily, and kind of presents sometimes opposing views to Christianity as well. Can you talk a little bit about the different experts, if you will, that are involved with this?
It's a huge range. Everybody from Joel Osteen, who I think everybody knows is a megachurch pastor, to Bishop Michael Curry, who's the head of the Episcopal Church. Father Jim Martin, a Jesuit, was a consultant. Several other Catholics were consultants as well. So it's just a huge range. We had Jewish scholars, we had evangelicals, we had lots of African Americans and Latinos. Just a very diverse, fun group of scholars and theologians and religious leaders.
And it does two things. One, it has the experts kind of in a documentary style, sit-down interviews, them explaining some of these different church history things and biblical explanations. But then there's acting, a narration, and it's really well acted, great sets and videography, acting out these different scenes. And then it's told through different characters from the Bible, from their perspective.
Correct.
Why do you think this whole method and process and combination of things is a good way and maybe a unique way to break open some of these common scripture stories?
Yeah, I think it's really powerful and compelling. And, if you compare it with many other stories, I mean, this is really, like I said, a very compelling way to do it. And I think by looking at the life of Jesus through the eyes of some of the people who knew him best or who interacted with him the most at critical moments of his life and his mission, you get a sense of just how real Christ was in the world. I know that sounds kind of silly. We're all Christians, we're all believers. I mean, but you really get a sense of the embodiment of Christ in the world, in history. And I think that's what makes it so different and so powerful with this approach.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting is it doesn't stick to the quotes in Scripture necessarily. So even parts that are scriptural, it might be some version of it or an interpretation of it. But then a lot of the stuff isn't scriptural at all, because the whole first episode is told through the perspective of Joseph, and
of whom there's very, very little in the gospel.
Notoriously, who has zero quotes from St. Joseph. And so whenever he's speaking in here, it's all what we could maybe assume by the text or guess by perspective or whatever. So how should we as Catholics keep that in mind when we're watching this series?
Well, that's a good point. So, for example, in that first episode, the one that you're referring to, when Joseph is the main character, when Joseph finds out that his betrothed is pregnant, he reacts the way we might expect any man to have acted under those circumstances. Mm-hmm. He's doubtful. He's, shaken. He's angry. He's despairing. And, until he comes around and realizes the role of the visitation of the angel in his dream isn't shown there, but you still get a sense that there's some kind of an inner transformation of the man. So it's, it's an effort to be really faithful to the Gospels, but also to tell a very effective and powerful story, the story of the Gospels, through the lens of these characters in a somewhat fictionalized format. Yeah.
We're talking about this series that's available from the History Channel. It's called Jesus, His Life. It's airing now on TV, but then also it's available through their website. You can watch the first one for free, and then the rest of them are locked if you have an account. So Dr. Stephen Schneck is talking about it, and kind of curious, did you learn anything from watching this series or going through the process of it?
I learned a ton. Anytime you get a bunch of historians and theologians and religious leaders, all of whom have tremendous expertise, you get them all, talking about things, you're going to learn something. For example, we had debates about how to interpret particular words in Greek, the language that the New Testament was written in. Uh-huh. And, I remember, for example, a long discussion, since you mentioned the Joseph episode, a long discussion about whether, in fact, Joseph was a carpenter or not. And the word in Greek, I came to learn, is tekton, uh-huh. which I know enough ancient Greek to say that actually doesn't mean carpenter, it means builder, but I'd never actually thought about this before. So there was a big discussion about whether, in fact, literally we could call Joseph a carpenter or not. So yes, that's just a tiny hint. I learned about the nature of Herod's role in historical times. I learned it was I can't even begin to tell you. I scratched the surface of all I learned. It was really just a tremendous opportunity for me to be part of it all.
We mentioned the first episode is told through the perspective of St. Joseph. What are some of the perspectives of the other episodes?
Well, so there are 8 episodes, and they have been airing back-to-back 2 each week. So the first 2 episodes were Joseph and John the Baptist. The next 2 episodes were Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Caiaphas. This week, Judas and Pilate aired, and next week, Holy Week, we've got Mary Magdalene and Peter. And in addition to these characters, there's also a kind of a chronology through the Gospels. So the story of Joseph is also the story of the Nativity, and next week, the story of Peter will be about the resurrection, and the story of Mary Magdalene will be about the crucifixion. So there's a kind of a march through the chronology of the Gospels that's also associated with these characters.
So what impresses you the most about this series?
First, I think I've already said, it's just the collection of experts and historians and theologians, I think, is unprecedented. This is mind-boggling to think that they got so much expertise in the room to talk about and think about these things. And then second, the quality of the production. This is better than a lot of movies in terms of the quality of production. They really spent money to get this right. To get the clothing right, to get the food right, to get the technology of the times right. I remember, for example, a debate about whether Pontius Pilate and his wife could ride in a carriage or not. And so we had to, experts gathered to wrestle with whether, in fact, Roman governors traveled by carriage or whether they were carried around by other means. It was so, they really, really tried to get this as right as possible, sticking to the scripture and trying to capture the historical reality of the moment. So I think that's what makes it so good. Yeah. The back and forth between the actors telling the story and the experts commenting on what we can learn from these scenes that are being portrayed is just really powerful. So a lot going on there. It's just a great series.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite episode?
Actually, the very last episode, the episode about Peter, mm-hmm. Which is also the episode in which the resurrection is portrayed, is, I think, my favorite. I had, like everybody else, you read scripture and you come up with your own sense of what these people must have been like. And I had this idea of Peter that was kind of challenged by working with these experts and by this series. So, Peter comes across as an everyman, as all of us, as someone who fails, even in his faith, denying Christ 3 times, and yet, unlike Judas Iscariot, despite those failures, he finds a way to stay true to the faith, despite it all. And so it's just, I think, a really, really good episode. So I really like Peter, the last one. Joseph is also good, the one that you mentioned, which is one of the first. And then the 2 episodes in which the antagonists to Jesus are portrayed, Caiaphas and Judas, I think those are interesting from a different perspective. I didn't find them quite so moving, but at the same time, I think they offered a kind of an angle on the Bible, on the gospel stories that I hadn't really thought about quite so much before. So they're good too. But in truth, I think Peter, the last episode that you'll see next week, is my favorite.
Well, as far as I can tell, it seems like the experts, for the most part, are agreeing on things. There's an occasional where they'll offer two sides to things, like did they need to go for the census, or was that just a storytelling device? Does that happen very often with this series, kind of a disagreement between experts?
Well, of course. Anytime you get this many experts in a room, you're going to come up with multiple takes on things. The only, I think one of the most interesting disagreements that we had was whether Jesus had brothers and sisters or not. And I think that, that the Gospels talk about Jesus' brothers and sisters. And so it wasn't a debate about what the Gospel actually says. The debate was, how are we to interpret that? And of course, in the Catholic traditions, we believe that Mary remained ever virgin. Mm-hmm. And so from the Catholic perspective, these brothers and sisters are accounted for in different ways. We talk about them as people who came to live in the household with Joseph and Mary, perhaps, children of Joseph's from a previous marriage or something like that. But for many Protestant denominations, of course, they accept the idea of Jesus having brothers and sisters. And so the way in which it's portrayed in the series is both sides are presented. Mm-hmm. So, you have someone presenting the Protestant perspective, and then you have, I think it's Father Jim Martin, the Jesuit, who presents the Catholic perspective.
Well, how can people watch this series?
Well, you can watch the History Channel on Monday night. See them this upcoming Monday, Holy Week Monday, to watch it live, the first airing, and then it's available as well on the History Channel's website. The first episode, I believe, is free. The one about St. Joseph, mm-hmm. But the rest of them you will have to pay a little bit to see it there. But it's really worth seeing. It really is. This is particularly, I think it's a great series to get you in the mood artistically for Holy Week and for Easter. I think it's a wonderful opportunity.
All right. Again, you can find that at history.com. It's called Jesus, His Life. Jesus, His Life. Thank you so much, Dr. Stephen Schneck, for joining us today and sharing this with us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Kyle. Call anytime.